FBI Director Christopher Wray issued a stark warning yesterday that Israel-Hamas war posing a danger here at home, increasing the possibility of terrorist attacks on U.S. soil. Here's a clip of his testimony before the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. Let's watch.
We assess that the actions of Hamas and its allies will serve as an inspiration, the likes of which we haven't seen since ISIS launched its so-called caliphate several years ago. In just the past few weeks, multiple foreign terrorist organizations have called for attacks against Americans and the West. Al-Qaeda issued its most specific call to attack the United States in the last 5 years. ISIS urged its followers to target Jewish communities in the United States and Europe.
He also pointed to several attacks that have taken place here, like the murder of a 6-year-old Palestinian boy.
Here in the United States, our most immediate concern is that violent extremists, individuals or small groups, will draw inspiration from the events in the Middle East to carry out attacks against Americans going about their daily lives. That includes not just homegrown violent extremists inspired by a foreign terrorist organization, but also domestic violent extremists targeting Jewish or Muslim communities.
This comes as a student at Cornell University has been arrested in connections with online threats he made against Jewish students on campus. Police are accusing 21-year-old Patrick Day, a junior at Cornell, of posting these threatening messages calling for the deaths of Jewish people, including saying he was going to shoot up a Jewish dining hall and stab Jewish students on site. Campuses across the U.S. are facing an internal battle in protecting students' competing free speech and safety interests amidst the explosion of war in the Middle East.
Yeah, it was kind of maybe remarkable, but not so remarkable. I'm not sure what the capacity of people are to track down these people who say things on chat rooms. We've seen several instances of police making contact with folks who've made these sorts of threats, not bringing them in, and then seeing horrible tragedies unfold, right, like the 18 people we just saw killed in Maine and, you know, a couple dozen others injured there. So I think these threats were completely inappropriate, and it's a good thing that the cops are able to track him down. It's interesting, his parents seemed very surprised by this, and they were talking about some ongoing mental health issues he's been experiencing. And I do wonder if this is going to be read through that same lens of this is someone with a mental health disorder that is often evoked when certain other kind of shootings come up.
Yeah, and this is a good example of why I always caution against saying an attack or something is on any side, no matter what direction it's coming from, is an example of ideologically motivated violence or extremist hate. This person was clearly targeting Jewish students. He was going to target a Jewish dining hall. He's also, according to his parents, obviously we're going to learn more information, very mentally ill and depressed. They worried he was a suicide risk to himself. He is mentally unwell, and the manifestation of that unwell characteristic was a threat against Jewish people, perhaps because that's what's going on in the news and that's what the valence is. I mean, frankly, that could also be true of the man who killed tragically that 6-year-old boy. Maybe he's mentally ill, and this is the manifestation of what. So people are very quick to pass judgment in cases where it's plausibly there's a hate motivation, but it is complicated because even ordinary people who are hateful don't generally commit violence. People who are racist, people who are anti-Semitic, people who are anti-Islamic, people who have bigoted views, they don't commit violence. The people who do commit violence often have overlapping extreme mental health problems that are frankly probably the looming larger issue.
Yeah, according to his parents, Day sunk into a deep depression back in 2021, 1 year after he started his engineering studies degree at Cornell. Cornell does have this reputation of having a lot of depression, mental illness, and suicides on campus. The gorges that are near Cornell's campus are known as a suicide spot. This is like a stereotype the university has. I think because of the rigor of the place, the focus on some of these STEM sciences and the very cold and isolated location make it a place where a lot of people find it very difficult to be happy. But to your point, most people who are unhappy don't manifest it in this way, and certainly don't make such explicit statements targeting a particular ethnic group the way that Day did. So I'm sure we will hear more about this. I do think there's some concern people have about whether or not instances like this, where someone is clearly making very specific, targeted anti-Semitic statements, is lumped in with folks, including many Jewish students who are protesting at universities across the country in support of the rights of Palestinians.
Sure, and these things,
occupation.
Frankly, these things should be very easy to distinguish. You have absolutely every right to engage in protest. It's your First Amendment right. You cannot engage in violence or destruction. You can't make explicit threats, but you can and should organize to have your viewpoint expressed. That is clearly protected. It's protected in public places. It's protected on college campuses, et cetera. We should not gloss over the beginning of the segment about the FBI saying there could be threats in the homeland, which is, I mean, legitimately frightening. I don't know if you remember, during the kind of height of ISIS, there were not a large number of attacks, but there were a couple homegrown terrorist cells who were inspired by what ISIS was doing abroad, resulting in plots within the country that were not connected to ISIS in really any formal way, but were inspired by the terrorism they were committing, and that was very frightening at the time.
Yeah, and I do think it's good that Wray noted that the one instance that we have of someone being motivated by the events in the Middle East that has actually executed their attack and successfully killed this 6-year-old Palestinian-American boy and stabbed many times and seriously injuring his mother as she was trying to protect him, was not someone who was killing, had murdered a Jewish person, but someone who took the calls of a kind of jihad day seriously and felt, either because of mental illness or hate or some combination of the two, like it was incumbent on him to preemptively murder a 6-year-old child because he, I guess, was a jihadist in his mind. So who knows the way these things are going to manifest, but it does seem very clear that this conflict is making everyone who is Arab or even looks Arab, we saw a lot of Sikhs become targets in the wake of 9/11, and as well as the Jewish community, less safe.
For sure. Well, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis recently defended his actions to deactivate pro-Palestinian groups across college campuses in the Sunshine State. Let's watch.
This is not cancel culture. This group, they themselves said in the aftermath of the Hamas attack that they don't just stand in solidarity, that they are part of this Hamas movement. And so, yeah, you have a right to go out and demonstrate, but you can't provide material support to terrorism. They've linked themselves to Hamas, and so we absolutely decertified them. They should not get 1 red cent of taxpayer dollars. And we also have strong laws in Florida against fundraising for groups like Hamas, and we are enforcing those vigorously. That's not a First Amendment issue. That's a material support to terrorism issue.
DeSantis' crackdown comes as the Senate also joined in condemning anti-Israel student groups. They're framing in a resolution last Friday. Per The Intercept, both are part of a larger trend of backlash to pro-Palestinian advocacy growing across the U.S. One legal activist told the outlet, quote, "We are seeing people being fired from their jobs, being investigated by HR over their social media posts or conversations with colleagues, and having job offers rescinded. There's a clear trend that people's jobs are being targeted right now." What do you make of this and Ron DeSantis's framing of this as not a First Amendment issue, saying that people are fundraising for Hamas? Isn't this very similar to the accusations people were making about, say, the Canadian protesters and why GoFundMe justified shutting down the ability of that group to raise bail funds and the like?
Well, I mean, the Canadian truckers should not be considered a terrorist group, and Hamas should be considered a terrorist group.
Right, but these people aren't fundraising for Hamas.
Right. No, I looked at the issue. I wrote about it. I don't disagree with DeSantis' characterization of the group's position. I think the things the group wrote in its toolkit are horrific, but they have every right to say them. They have every right to the National Students Justice for Palestine.
Pro-Palestine groups across the basically state.
Well, it's the same group. It's the chapter in 2 different, multiple colleges. It's the same group, National Students for Justice in Palestine. So they have material. So I read their toolkit, which endorses the actions taken October 7th very unequivocally. So I'm totally against what this group represents, and I completely disagree with them, but I disagree with the governor. They have a right to engage in that advocacy. It's not providing material support to a terrorist group. Also, his order doesn't, it just orders them to stop, to basically to disband this group and reorganize on campus with a different name. So you're not even going to stop their activism. The idea that this is like formally connected to Hamas in some way that gets around First Amendment protection is, I think, laughable.
Yeah, it's notable that several people have come out and disagreed with Ron DeSantis on this from the Republican side of the aisle, including Vivek Ramaswamy and Candace Owens, who've been pretty principled on this. Glenn Greenwald has been talking a lot about this on his show and mine as well recently. I do wonder if this is going to strike a significant blow to the credibility of actors like Ron DeSantis, who have made so much of their kind of political campaign posture about being the vanguards and protectors of free speech. And it's worth pairing this with some other instances that we've talked about on the show before, where the Cop City protesters were labeled as terrorists in their efforts to raise bail money for people who were arrested for doing things like passing out flyers. Another clear speech right was attacked by the state and characterized as raising money for terrorism. How far is this going to go?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we've seen people being in the past very selective and hypocritical about the cancel culture, whether they support firings and opportunities being taken away or people being expelled, that sort of thing, based on offensive or otherwise statements they've made. And I've always been on the side of saying that a lot of this behavior is protected by the First Amendment from a legal standpoint, and then of course firing someone, you can do whatever you want, but I don't think it's good for society to have a broad norm where everybody, the second you say something wrong or we go digging into your past to find out something you did or said when you were a lot younger, and we're going to punish you for it now, is really good in an era where we can easily hold each other to account, where our statements are captured on video and are made in text that stick around forever. It will be very easy to hold each other accountable to a level that will be paranoid and unhealthy.
Well, also because Ron DeSantis is specifically saying this is not a First Amendment concern because it's terrorism. So if simply labeling something you don't like terrorism is able to successfully stand at any point as absolving you from your free speech protection,
I was on Fox News. I was on
world.
Fox News on Sunday, and I made this point. The federal government thinks January 6th protesters are terrorists. So they think anti-vaccine people are terrorists. They think wielders of misinformation are stochastic terrorists. We can't have a government that has unlimited ability to define terrorism as just speech they don't like and punish them for it. And that's something Republicans understand on a lot of issues, but
not on this one.
Not applying.
And the reason why I have always felt very strongly about this issue is because the core group that has always borne the brunt of these kind of shifts in law and standards have been people who have advocated against U.S. war interests, and particularly in defense of Palestinians. We saw how even supporting BDS has been criminalized I shouldn't say criminalized in the South, but has made you ineligible for government contracts in the South. These attempts to make it borderline illegal to support a boycott, which is one of the few nonviolent ways people can resist the occupation in Palestine. It's really incredible stuff. There's been some fascinating things happening with environmental protesters, where there's been a ratcheting up of criminal penalties for people who chain themselves to buildings and trees and pipelines and things. There's one protester who's in jail for 9 years for one such action, which is longer than a lot of people who commit violent felonies are in jail for. And it does increasingly feel like there's a push to both shrink the levers of democracy available in the United States at the same time that you limit the extra electoral means at people's disposal to advocate for what they want out of our government. And so we will continue, of course, to follow incursions on people's free speech rights and protest rights right here on Rising. Please do stick around. More Rising for you after this.